All right, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Sunday worship. My name is Thomas. I'm part of the pastoral team here. Once again, happy Mother's Day to all the moms. I hope today you can feel honored not only by your family, but also by our church. We don't know exactly what you do, but we know it's not easy always. And so I hope you could feel honored on this day where oftentimes we don't feel honored in our households. And so I want to lift up this day to all of you. If it is your first time here, again, you are here during a sermon series that we started last week. It is through 1 Thessalonians, which is often known as the first letter that the Apostle Paul wrote. And there's a lot of things we could say about this letter, but we are having a specific focus because of a lot of things happening in our church, which is this idea of rediscovering the beauty of the church. And so if this feels niche, it's because we are purposely making it niche. We know a lot of you have been visiting our church or have been here for like less than a year or two, and it kind of gives us a peek of what this church wants to be about and the type of church that we want to model ourselves after. Because the church of Thessalonica, they were unique where the Apostle Paul, he calls them a model church, a church that we said it comes from the Greek word tupos, that we should emulate after ourselves. And we said last week when we opened up this letter that the way we also could become a model church is having the type of perspective we need in a church, following the template that was laid out for us in 1 Thessalonians, and also participating in that vision. Today, we're going to be looking at 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn to chapter 2. Or if you have your programs, it should also be there as well. We're going to be looking at verses 1 and all the way down to verse 12. And here at our church, we believe when we read the scriptures, our God is alive and is speaking. So can we all rise as we read this passage from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Starting verse 1, Paul writes, "For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with the pretext for greed, God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So, being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. We work night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you, while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct towards you believers. For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory." This is the reading of God's word. Let's all pray before we begin. Father, as we read this passage, and as we see, O Lord, how it speaks to us, help us, O Lord, to have renewed minds, to pause our thoughts and worries of this past weekend, or even the anxiousness that might await us this upcoming week. May we be still for a moment and hear you speak, O Lord. So would you renew again our hearts, strengthen us, and give us renewed grace that's needed for this upcoming season. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. Anybody here know what the most popular nonfiction category that people read today? I'm sure for a lot of us, we don't even know what those categories are, but if you guys don't know, there's a website talks about how the world's largest book data. I have no idea how they got this data, but apparently they figured out what are the top 5 nonfiction books that people read these days. At number 5, health and wellness. So if you want to get healthy, if you want to be physically strong, this is a book or resource that a lot of people read. That's the type of genre. Number 4 is self-help, how to be a better person, how to have a better mindset. Number 3 is philosophy, so the way to just understand life. Number 2, history. I hear a lot of men especially like to read history, Rome and whatnot, so that's something that's popular there. You guys know what number 1 is? The number 1 genre that people read in the nonfiction category. Surprising. Biographies and autobiographies. The reason why people read biographies is you're not just learning their story when you read them, but you kind of, as you read it, are trying to figure out how do you implement their story into your own story. So for example, if you ever read the book Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, man, when you read that book, you just read how Steve Jobs was innovative and changed the world, and when you close it, you're like, I want to change the world. And you just get this inspiration that's just kind of there. That's how a biography often works. Or have you ever read The Ride of Your Life by Bob Iger, Disney president? You read that book and you go, Bob Iger had this compelling vision as a businessman, but also somehow maintained his humanity and really implements that value of maintaining your humanity in the workplace. Again, you just walk away, want to be inspired like that. Another popular book, Becoming by Michelle Obama. I haven't read that one, but apparently when you read that book, you walk away thinking like, this is vulnerability. This is, even though you're a cultural icon, she is just so open with her life and her struggles that you walk away also want to be vulnerable. And the reason why I bring this up is because in 1 Thessalonians, we read last week, Paul, chapter 1, he's giving thanks and praise to the Thessalonians. They are the model church. And here in chapter 2, Paul does something interesting. Paul shares what you could describe as his autobiography. He shares about his time that he was with the Thessalonians. And when you look at this chapter, you're kind of like, why is he doing this? At first glance, you're kind of like, it sounds like he's almost recounting just his time, where you remember back in Japan when we hung out, or back at this retreat. It almost sounds like he's doing that, and yet that's not actually what Paul is doing. Paul is not just reminiscing about good times with the Thessalonians, but he's actually reminding the Thessalonians, through the way he lived with them, the model of leadership that he offered them. Because nobody influences a group more than the leaders of that group. That's why chapter 1, verse 6, Paul said, and you became imitators of us. Because they were the ones that established the church, Paul, Silvanus, Timothy. And this is actually what made the church of Thessalonica a model church. They imitated the type of leadership that Paul, Timothy, Silvanus offered to the Thessalonians. And I bring this up because today, I would argue last week rather, I proposed how we are witnessing the largest and fastest church decline in U.S. history, where people, even though they still believe in God, they still worship Jesus, and yet for some reason they're a little bit disillusioned by the church. And I'd argue a lot of that has to do with the church leaders. Lifeway Research in 2025 talks about how the trust in a pastor or clergy, it has just plummeted in recent years. This is a little chart that's there. Oh, you can't see the years, but down at the bottom, 2000, 65% of people had trust in a pastor. So if I was in a room with all of you, and there's only let's say a few of us, so at least more than half of you would be like, yeah, that guy's trustworthy. He's a pastor. Oh, great. But today, if I'm in a PTA meeting and what do you do for a living? I'm like, I'm a pastor. Man, the percentage of people who actually looked like, they're like, oh, it's very low. 30%. That means 7 out of 10 people will look at me with skepticism. And can't blame them too often either, because when you're just aware of what's happening in the church these days, it is just very discouraging. I mean, #MeToo became #ChurchToo, where a lot of these stories came out where it's not just brokenness in Hollywood, but brokenness in the church. I mean, you just read news stories after news stories of fallen pastors, fallen church leaders, mug shots of pastors and leaders of the congregation, and it's just so discouraging. Just go on Hulu, go on Disney+, go on Netflix, go into the documentary section. You're gonna see a documentary about a church falling, about a religious figure falling. John Tyson, he's a pastor in New York, he says it like this, quote, "Today, there is a total crisis of trust and disillusionment happening around leadership in the Christian church. The church is supposed to be a place of healing. It's supposed to be a space of restoration. But it's ended up being a place of tremendous pain. There's a cynicism and a suspicion around leadership. So these days, for the most part, when people step into a church, they're stepping in with a hesitancy I've never witnessed." And I think this is very true. This isn't just happening out there, but it's very true in our context. I know some of you, you're here because you've been very disappointed in the churches before, and a lot of it has to do with its leaders. Whether it be their character, false promises, motives that you realized. I know some of you, you've been here, you're not just disappointed, but you've been deeply wounded, where when you think of church, you just can't help but think of that person who was influential in that church that you're part of, whether it be they abandoned the church, scandal, or spiritual abuse. I know some of you, you're here and you're kind of suspicious and a little bit cynical of any type of pastor or leader figure in a church. Like, I've never had it where before, when people ask questions about our church, they would ask, how do I get plugged into community groups? Or like, hey, like, how do you get, like, know the community? I've had more people this year than ever before ask, hey, so who keeps you accountable? What's the accountability system for you guys? I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I know some of you, maybe you never experienced that type of like negativity or bad like harm from leaders, but you know these stories. You know people are weary of pastors and church leaders, and so you vow to never become one. Like, why would you do that? Why would you put yourself through the fire that way? So you'll chill, you'll be a member, you might serve a little bit, but any type of leadership spotlight, why would I want to get involved in that? I'm quoting some of you. Some of you have said that to me. Why would you do that? And I know this is, again, an understandable like moment that we're all in. And the proposal today is, well, what if our church, though, despite everything that's happening in the church at large, what if we offered a compelling alternative? What if we were a church where we didn't have perfect leaders, but those who are leading, they are able to model the best of the gospel? Where we don't say we don't have any weaknesses, but we're willing to admit our weaknesses, ask for forgiveness, strive to live godly lives. What if we were those types of leaders? And what if this church had that? 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul lays out a radically different model of leadership than we see in the workplace, in the schools, in our homes, and sadly even in the church these days. He offers a model of leadership, one that's credible, that's beautiful, and I think you'll find life-giving. And the reason why Paul does this is when churches rediscover leaders like this, then we could begin to rediscover the beauty of a church. And I know this topic could be a little bit niche. It's not so much how do you live your life, how do you become a better mom or so forth. I know this is not one of those type of messages, but again, our focus is rediscovering the beauty of this church. And a lot of you here, you're either a part of this church or you're figuring out what type of church this is. And I hope that at this cultural moment where a lot of us, we just have a negative view around us, everyone around us about how the church functions, that we can get a little bit of an insight at this church. How do we view those who lead it and what we could do as a church to cultivate that type of culture? So 3 things we're going to talk about with this passage. Number 1 is the problem of toxic leaders. 2, a template for trustworthy leaders. And then 3, recognizing pillar leaders. So the problem, the template, the recognition. Let's first talk about the problem of toxic leaders. Well, I could go on all day about this one. I have so many stories, but restraint, restraint, restraint. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Sounds like Paul, when you read this whole passage, if you take it first glance, it almost sounds like people are accusing him or suspicious of him. He's trying to defend himself. But he's doing something a little bit different. It's a little bit deeper than that. He's actually giving a contrast of the type of leader that they think people are versus the type of person he is. And the reason why is because in the ancient world that Paul's writing to, there was no Netflix, there was no internet, there was no TV, no YouTube. And so what do you do for entertainment? Not much. But there was one type of entertainment that people experienced in the first century all the time, which is this idea of traveling philosophers. Today, if you see back then in the 1920s, like circus comes to town, or today it's like something that comes to Hollywood Bowl. Back then, when the fun came when a philosopher would come to the marketplace. You're just doing your thing, shopping or doing whatnot. A guy would come, and all of a sudden he would just start talking about something that's very interesting to the audience, and then it draws a crowd. It's like today when I scroll on Twitter, and sometimes I just see someone tweet, you want to know how to lose your belly fat without exercise? 5 steps. And man, they get me so often. I'm like, oh man, I know this probably isn't real, but I just click it, and it's just like this thread, you go down, and without fail, they barely give you any insight what it is. It just leads you to this website or this product, and you're like, oh, this is the dreaded clickbait that they get you with. And that's kind of how the philosophers were back then. They would come into town, they'd say something interesting, some people would be like, tell me more. They draw a crowd, they sometimes take advantage of that, where they exploit them financially or even sexually. And then that philosopher, he would bounce and go to the next town. And so philosophers back then, there was a very negative reputation, just like we have a view clickbait as a negative reputation. And the reason why that this is important is because the question that might be there with Paul is, are you one of these clickbait people? Because if you know the history of Thessalonica, Paul, he randomly came to this town, he preached the gospel, he gained a following, and then he bounced because there was persecution taking place. Is he like these guys? Because that was almost like the context for how the Thessalonians understood him. And Paul's trying to make clear in chapter 2 that he is not like these traveling philosophers. He is different, And he highlights 3 ways that he's not like them. First, he highlights the motives. Look at what it says in verse 3. Paul says, "For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive." Paul is trying to explain this word appeal. He says it's different than the philosophers. This word appeal in the Greek, perikalesis, it is to encourage or to embolden, meaning not to encourage someone, but what gives you courage? What emboldens you to do something? If you see somebody, you want to get their number, or you like emboldened, but like, oh, before they leave, I'm going to ask them out. Or like, this is my one chance, and you feel emboldened. Paul is saying what emboldens Paul is not the same thing that emboldens these philosophers, which is this idea of falsity or this idea of hidden agendas. That is not what Paul was doing. Secondly, the methods Paul highlights. Look at verse 5. Paul says, "We never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with the pretext for greed." The word flattery, it's saying something that you don't really believe, but you say it simply just to get someone to be kind of like see you with favor. I remember going to a department store, and I never wear hats. My head is not meant for hats, but I put on a hat just to see. And I remember one of the salesmen's like, "That looks amazing on you." I'm just like, liar. This is so not true. But he was saying that simply because he wanted me to buy the hat. That's flattery. And Paul is saying that is not what he did, and yet that's what the philosophers did all the time. They say whatever will get you to get their product or to follow them. If they see a group of Laker fans, they're like, Lakers. But if it's Clippers, Clippers. If they see a group like Kamala Harris, Trump, they'll just switch sides. It doesn't matter. It's depending on who it is that they're speaking to, because they don't care what they're talking about. They just want you to follow them. And Paul says, we weren't like that. We didn't try to butter you up. If we were trying to butter you up, we're terrible at it because we got chased out of town everywhere we went, in Philippi, in Thessalonica. And that leads to the third thing, the mission. Look what Paul says in verse 6. "Nor do we seek glory from people, whether from you or for others." The main goal of the philosophers was to seek glory from people, to make a name for themselves so that they could build a brand, a personality. And Paul was saying that was not the goal of him and his companions. That was not what they were chasing after. And so in other words, Paul's trying to contrast. This is what you're used to. That's not who I am. This reminds me of a story that happened to me years ago. My wife and I, we went to eat at Chick-fil-A when our kids were like really young. Parents, going out to eat with young children, it's just a bad idea. We do it, but it's a bad idea because it's so hard with the kids yelling and wanting preferences. And it's just like we regret it every time, but we did it one time, and I still remember this day. We went to Chick-fil-A. Their kids were acting crazy, so frustrated. I'm ordering food, and I could just tell in the back, I see my wife sitting down with the crazy kids, and there's this other mom at another table. She had her kids on her own. She was like talking to my wife. I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. You don't see that happen often. And I remember I sat back down, and my wife introduced me to the person sitting next to her. And man, like this lady, she was so nice. Like she was being super friendly. She's like, "Hey, how old are your kids?" "It's so hard. I gotta have my own kids." And we saw her kids being crazy too. And she's like, "Hey, you guys got this." And I was just like, wow, this is what it's like to be a parent. You're like part of this club where we're like trauma bonding with like other parents. And like we're like in this together. And not only did we like talk, but like even throughout the whole Chick-fil-A dinner, she was just asking questions. We're just talking the whole dinner. Like, not sitting at the same table, but like next to each other. We're just chatting. We're like, "Where do you live?" Like, "We live in Placentia." "We do too." We're like, "Oh my gosh." And we're even thinking like, wow, we found like a friend. Maybe we could do like a play date. I just never experienced anything like that before in my life. And so at the end of dinner, we said bye. My wife went to the bathroom, and then I went to put the kids in the car. And as I was buckling them, I just felt in the parking lot this presence, this shadow behind me. And I turned around, and it's the mom. And she's with her kids. I'm like, "Oh, hey." And she's like, "Hey, before you go, do you have any retirement plans? Do you know what your retirement plans are?" And I was like, "Huh?" And I was so like confused. I was like, "Oh, I've heard of you guys." Just know, if you have someone go up to you and they're like in their 30s and they're like, "Hey, you want to retire early?" Like, you got to be very suspicious of that. There's a thing like that that goes around. And she was just like laying out the deal of how we could retire early, how we have to worry about our kids and so forth. And as she was doing that, I was like, oh my, it made me like recollect the whole meal. Like, "You lied to me. That was all shit. Like, this is why I don't talk to people. Like, it's because of you. Like, this is a sham." And it made me just like see everything with like, man, that was not authentic. And I remember thinking like, wow, like you weren't really trying to empathize with us. You weren't trauma bonding with us. You were trying to just help yourself get a customer. And when you experience something like that, you could understand why that's a sucky feeling. Like that's not great. Why did that happen at Chick-fil-A? But man, it's a worse experience when it happens at church. And you experience something like, wow, I thought this was a place that would love, care, shepherd me, and it's the opposite. And the reason why that happens is because a lot of churches, there are leaders where they have the total wrong motives, the wrong methods, and the wrong mission. Let's talk about that little by little. The motives. People often go and enter church leadership for reasons, not because they're trying to scam you. It's not because they're like, I want to destroy this church. That's very rare for the few psychopaths that go into ministry. What usually happens is they don't even know what their motives are. Have you ever heard this term, Maslow's gap, before? Maslow's gap is coined by Abraham Maslow, and he pretty much argues that every child has basic fundamental needs that need to be fulfilled. And if a child grows up in a household where those needs are not fulfilled, they grow up desperately seeking to fulfill that, and as soon as they have any type of power or influence, they will use that to fill that gap that's in their soul. So for example, if you were raised in a household where you did not get much affirmation, you got very little praise, you got very little good jobs, what happens is as you get older, you are desperately seeking affirmation and you don't even know it, because that's just fundamentally gone that you don't have. That's why you notice so many leaders, they love the spotlight. They love the idea of preaching and people going, oh, because it's just filling their souls in a way that they didn't realize they need filling. Or if they're raised in a household without much money, they're always worried about what's going to happen next month. What happens as they get older, they're just seeking after safety and resources to make sure that they're okay, because that's just a gap that they don't realize that they have. And so the result is you have churches who are led by people unknowingly trying to fill these personal voids, and they're looking at the church to fill that. A lot of the times, the motives are just totally off. Or for some people, it's the methods. I think today it's not flattery. I mean, if I told you, you're so special, look at you. If I talk like that, it's like, dude, who's this guy? You would be so suspicious. Not many churches are that blatant about trying to use flattery to get people to follow them. But you know what churches do today that are very effective for a crowd like this? Not flattery, we use shame and guilt. Oh, we're very good at shame and guilt to get you to do something. What? Don't you want to be holy? Jesus died on the cross for you, right? And you can't let go of this? What's wrong with you? Or service, Jesus, he serves you every day. You can't serve once a month? Are you serious? Or I know what type of coffee you buy. You buy coffee all the time. You can't sacrifice one coffee on a Sunday for tithing? Those subtle things that we hear to get you to do something. And what happens is when those are the methods that a church uses, you have a church that's following Jesus, that's obedient to Jesus, but they are totally motivated, not out of joy, not out of love, but out of shame, out of fear, out of guilt. It's kind of like this heavy burden. Or think of the mission. We think that the mission of this church is to glorify God, fame in Jesus' name. And sometimes they go really? Is that really the goal? You want to know a leader's goal in a church? You want to know what really drives them? Look at what they get angry about. What ticks them off. That will show you a lot about what's driving them. I remember a college student, I shared a story sometimes where, man, he really wanted to be the president of this campus ministry. He was I think, everyone's you're going to be the president. And he was a junior. He's yeah, I think so too. And he would meet with me going, hey, when I become president, this is how we should partner our church and the campus ministry. I'm yeah, for sure, man. The devastation when they asked his roommate to be the president and not him. Oh, you should just sense devastation. He was so deflated, so angry. He was, I'm never going to that campus ministry again. I was why are you so angry? He's because how's God going to be glorified by me not being president? He didn't really say that, but if he did, I'd be that's a weird response, brother. You're so angry because you're not the president. What is going on there? Our mission often gets tangled with ego without us knowing it. And this is kind of, I think, the experiences that a lot of us we've seen or heard or witnessed. Mark Sayers, he's an Australian pastor and author. He said one reason why leaders today have totally wrong motives, methods, and missions is because we practice something what he calls platform leadership. Platform leadership defined this way. It is leadership where someone elevates themselves for everybody to see. It's harking back to the first century where you have literal platforms where you stand up and everyone could see you. And you're trying to give directives, you're trying to lead the people, and yet the attention, the focus is on you. This is the air we breathe. Back then, it was literal platforms. Today, it is digital platforms. It's all about Instagram Reels, TikToks. It's all about posting about yourself. You just want people to see you, to notice you. The problem is when you practice that in a leadership arena, especially in the church, man, you get a lot of anxious people. I hear from friends that you want to meet the most anxious people, just look at social media influencers. They're so anxious because all their validity comes from the crowd and how many people like and how many people view. And so when you get anxious and you keep trying harder and it doesn't work, you get angry and frustrated. And that's why even in the church, you see a lot of anxious people, a lot of anxious leaders, a lot of angry leaders that take place. And that's the sad reality of what's often there today. What about you? What has been your experience with leaders in your life? At the workplace, in the sports field, in the church? How has that been? Some of you, you've been blessed with great leaders. And if you've been blessed, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, Tom. Like my pastors, my parents, they were great. That's awesome. I have more to say to you, but that's awesome. I know some of you, like you know exactly what I'm talking about. Toxic motives, toxic methods, toxic missions. Like I've heard stories from you guys, man, like some of you have seen your elders like punch each other. Like that's crazy. Church splits, a lead pastor, they just mysteriously disappear with vague, like why did they leave? Like you just don't know why. And this has sadly become the norm. Like I was so heartbroken when we established elders at our church. Literally 99% of you had nothing good to say about the elders at your former church. You're like, I didn't even know we had elders. Or they are terrible examples. What if it was different here? Where you could look at a church going, you know, the best thing about this church, I'm not sure about the members or the people, but those leaders, like they were good models. And that leads to the second point, a template for trustworthy leaders. What kind of leadership did Paul model to the Thessalonians? After Paul describes the type of leader he was not, he describes the type of leader that he was. And again, he highlights at least three things. First, he talks about his motives. His motives were not people-centered, but God-centered. Look at verse 4. Paul writes, just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. Imagine a church with a genuine desire, the deepest desire of the people at the center of this church is to please the Lord. Imagine that type of church. How do you know that that's real? How do you know that's the real motivation? This word that Paul uses in verse 4, approved by God, it's an interesting word. That word approved, it's the Greek word for testing something, to test if gold is real. And what Paul is trying to get at is that God didn't just give Paul his leadership, but he's been tested by the Lord to know that, dude, after what I went through, it's just for God. Like the motives are super clear. Because when Paul became a Christian, it wasn't like he was a scholar, rabbi, where they're like, oh my gosh, you're a Christian? You should become our leader. It wasn't like Kanye, where when he became a Christian, they blast him and go, hey, Kanye. It wasn't like that back then. When Paul converted, even though he was a scholar and a rabbi, he was somebody who had to make sure that for 3 years he went to Arabia, according to Galatians. He was following Barnabas and learning after his model, and then he became a leader. In other words, he was tested through trial, through persecution, through a long time, and only then could Paul say, and my heart and desire is generally for the Lord. The Maslow gap was a little bit less foggy for him, where he knew his motivation, what it was. In other words, you need to be tested in order to know what's driving your motivation. For today, when you look at who should be a leader, we look at charisma or seminary degrees or ordination papers. But what really clarifies if someone's qualified is have they been tested? John Tyson, again, I quoted him earlier, but he's a pastor in New York, and he said, you know, the clearest calling that he found to be a minister in a city like New York, it wasn't found in the seminary classroom. He said, I felt the call of God in the bathrooms. What he meant by that is John Tyson, when he first wanted to go to ministry, his first job at the church was to be the custodian. And he just cleaned everybody's poop and pee. Like that was just like his job for a year. He did that, and he became the outdoor groundskeeper at that church, cleaning weeds out. He became the middle school pastor, he became the youth pastor. And at the end of that journey, What Tyson says, that he looks back like, dude, that's how I knew I'm called to be a minister of the gospel, because it's not for the crowds. Nobody applauds you when you're doing that type of stuff. It's not for the paycheck. It's not even for personal joy. Like, this is fun. It's simply because of the Lord. It was because of the Lord. That was his motivation, purely for God. And Paul says that's what was for him as well. Secondly, Paul's methods, it wasn't just giving content, but he was lovingly relational with the Thessalonian church. Look at verses 7 to verse 8. Paul says, but we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. There's so many things to say about these two verses, a couple of highlights. Notice what Paul compares himself to. Not just a mother, but a nursing mother. If you compare yourself to a mother of older children, no offense, moms, we sometimes get really mad at our kids. They do stuff where it's like, temper flares and so forth. But man, you want to see the picture of gentleness, a nursing mom. A nursing mother, no matter how angry and tired and frustrated she is, just gentleness with their newborn child. Paul is saying we were like that with you, Thessalonica. No shame, no guilt tools to get you, to beat you up, to do what you got to do. We were so gentle among you. And notice also what Paul says. He was, in verse 7, being affectionately desirous of you. That word for affection, desirous, it's the same word that was used for parents when their child died and they wanted to see their child again. Paul is saying, I feel that about you, church. And then lastly, notice Paul says what he shared. He didn't just share the gospel, but he says, our very own selves. Paul was not just this mega church preacher, like, see you later, and bounce, but he ate with these people. He lived with them. He cried with them. Paul was deeply connected to this community. That's how he shepherded and led them. This reminded me of a story of a pastor named Tim Keller. You guys know, Tim Keller's my main man. There's one pastor that I respect. It's the late Tim Keller. And there's a biography that was written about him that came out last year. And Tim Keller, he's mainly known for his preaching. He's just a powerful intellectual teacher and preacher that just shaped New York City, the church that he planted called Redeemer, shaped generations of pastors. But what's interesting about his life is a lot of people don't notice, before he started a church in New York, he was actually pastoring in this small town of Virginia. And he pastored there for 9 years. And according to the biography, he preached over 1,500 sermons there. Imagine being a small church and you have the best preacher of your generation and you get access to the best preaching for 9 years. What happened was, after Keller left that church, went to Redeemer, 25 years passed since he pastored that church in Virginia, and he happened to come back and visit Virginia to that old church, and they wanted to throw him a welcome party, welcome back, we want to honor you for the way you pastored us. And the biography mentions how when Keller went to the church and they all had this dinner, each person went up and they shared something about how they were blessed by the way they remembered Keller pastor them. Not a single person mentioned a sermon. Not a single person mentioned, man, that message you gave, that sermon series. All they talked about were stories of how he was there for them when they were hurting, how he gave them dating advice, how he was there for them when they got married, their funerals. That's why street preachers and door-to-door missionaries, they kind of give us the ick, right? When you see them, it's you're delivering me this message of love and care, but you just kind of bounce afterwards. It doesn't do much to form and impact the soul. Because the best models of leaders are not those who dump content on you, but those who know you and those who actually you feel seen by. And Paul's that's what I did for you, Thessalonians. Thirdly, the mission. Paul saw where he wasn't using this church to help his own career and status, but he was genuinely doing to help them. Look at verse 12, what Paul says. For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Back in the first century, moms had a job, nurture the child, keep the child alive. Fathers had a specific job too, though. Train them, socialize them, get them ready for the real world. And Paul is I was like both parents to you. I was gentle like a nursing mom, but I was also like a father who I exhorted you. I called you to go out. I encouraged you. I came alongside of you, and I charged you. I gave you clear instructions. In other words, Paul, what he's trying to claim is his goal with this church was not to use this church to get them to like him or to build a name for himself, but he wanted to build a people. That was his goal. And that's why in chapter 2, verse 19 and 20, Paul says this about the Thessalonians. He says, what is our hope and our joy and our crown of boasting before our Lord Jesus at his coming? Is it not you, Thessalonian church? You are our glory and joy. In other words, Paul's almost saying, if I stand before Jesus, I'm not going to be like, Jesus, dude, I wrote half the New Testament, look at that. Or Jesus, look at all these churches I planted. What Paul's going to say to Jesus is, hey, look at the Thessalonians, how I poured into them, how I loved them. Look how they turned out. That is like my pride and joy. That's like my tombstone that I want marked there, is this people who I gave my heart to. You know what kind of leadership this is that Paul's demonstrating? It's the opposite of what Mark Sayers says of a platform leader. Again, the platform leader, look at me, make yourself visible for everyone to see. Sayers says there's platform leaders, but what the church is called to have is what he describes as pillar leadership. Leadership where someone carries hidden weight so everyone can flourish. Platforms are you become visible and everybody sees. Pillars is you hold the burden so that everyone can experience life before you. Again, when you look at platforms, you notice the people speaking. They are the ones where the light is shining upon them. That's how we see leadership everywhere in the world, and sadly in the church. But pillars, you don't see them unless you pay attention, because they're the ones that are holding the weight, the burden, the struggles of this infrastructure, so that the people who are there can experience life. And this is the type of leadership that Paul demonstrated and that the church is called to have as well. People who are flourishing because there are those who are holding the burden so that you can flourish. Those who are behind the scenes and they don't really notice, but then when you pay attention to them, you realize this is why this community is flourishing. What happens when you have a church or a community that models pillar leadership like this? What you have is you have a church that looks a lot like Jesus. Because this is what Jesus modeled as a leader. Jesus' motives, it was not people-centered. It was fully for the Father's glory, where he wanted to make sure that as he got sent down to earth, he was fulfilling the Father's plans. Jesus' methods, it was not to shame you, it was not to guilt trip you, it was not just to teach you a message that floats out in the air, but he walked among his people. He wept with the people who he ministered to. His mission was not to make a grandiose picture of himself, but he came humbled to prepare his people for a kingdom that was to come. You are his hope and his joy. That's who Jesus is. And that's why Paul says this is how he became the leader that he was. He tells the Thessalonians, you became imitators of me and of the Lord. Why? Because Paul says elsewhere in 1 Corinthians, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. I am this way because I follow Christ, because Christ was this way. Can you imagine if this was the type of church that you could be a part of? Where, people here, they're not flashy, but they are pillars. And there's life happening because there are people who are absorbing all the bad and just dispensing blessings that are here. How does this happen in our church? And that leads to the last point, the recognition of pillar leaders. How do you know if we have platformers here or pillars at this church? I tell people, and this is for anyone who's visiting, when you visit a church and you're trying to find a church, dude, don't believe in Instagram. It's not real. It's like the a curated version of what they want you to see in a church. Don't look at the website. I mean, look at the website, but just know the website is a curated version of what the church wants you to see. I would even say every church has a mission vision statement. Dude, it's just words. Do they really believe it? Do they really live it out? You know how you know what's true and what's not true? Don't look at Instagram. Come to the service and see the people. What are they like? Don't just look at the website. But man, see what are the leaders like? Talk to them. If you want to know what they believe in, don't look at the statement of faith. What do they emphasize? And the reason why is because you're not being told what a church is about. You're going to really see for yourself, this is what this community is about. And this is what Paul does. Paul doesn't tell the Thessalonians, hey, remember me, this was how I was like. And he doesn't just tell them this is who he is. But notice what Paul, throughout this whole chapter, what he appeals to. He does this over and over again. Verse 1, you yourselves know when I was with you. Verse 2, as you know, Thessalonians. Verse 5, as you know. Verse 9, you remember when I was like that? Verse 10, you are witnesses. Verse 11, for you know. Paul's trying to let them know that, remember, I was with you. If I'm lying, you could call me out. Because that's how a church is really going to know, this is a church filled with platforms or pillars. And if we want to be a church that's filled with pillars as leaders, let me just exhort us to a couple of things. Number one is this. We need to live as pillars in whatever leadership role we have. The reason why we have so many people who lead a church in a toxic way is because you lead everything in a toxic way. All of us have roles, not in the church, but some level of influence, whether it be in your business,
You're a manager, you're a parent, you're a coach, you're an older sibling. You have influence somewhere, and the question is, are you using that more as a platform or a pillar? To be a pillar in the church means you have to be a pillar everywhere. Secondly, not only do we live as pillars outside and everywhere we are, but let's make sure in this church we raise up and establish pillars here. One good thing is that this church, we're a young church, and so we don't have fully developed leadership structures yet that could even be corrupted, I think, fully. But if we are at a start, it's pretty, in my opinion, it's promising. We have one leadership group that's here, that's formal, that's been recognized by the church, and it's right here. It's our elders. These are the elders leading us, and the question is, are they platformers or are they pillars? I spend a lot of time with these guys, and if I could just briefly speak on each one, and then we'll close our time together. The guy on the right, Pastor Sam Bay, you guys know who, this sounds kind of funny, you know his background? He was, I always highlight this, he was ASB president of Sunny Hills. And for some reason when I hear that, I'm like, dang, you could have been anything. If you could be president in Sunny Hills, you must have been the man. He doesn't like me saying this much, but he was in a production crew back in the day. Before things got super viral, he was part of this production crew that was making films and so forth. And Sam was really into that. I'm just dude, you could have been a social media influencer this day if you wanted to. I mean, if you guys know Sam, he's a gifted leader, a gifted preacher. I always say he could do anything he wants. If our church died, don't worry about Sam. There's 10 megachurches that would just snatch him up. And that gives me confidence that, man, Pastor Sam, he is not here for the money. He can make way more somewhere else. He's not here for the stage. There's a lot bigger churches he could be on the stage for. And he's not here because it's easy. Man, you guys don't know half the things he does. All the people he meets with, the burdens he carries. I have full confidence from all the years I've known Pastor Sam, he's here because he feels called by the Lord to be fully devoted to the people in this church. That's a pillar. The other brother to the left, Vince Tong, Elder Vince, man, if you think Sam's amazing, Vince, he's a civil engineer. That's his full-time job. He's a husband and a father of 2 young kids, and he never had any ambition where I want to be a leader. That was the last thing that was on his mind. And let me tell you, Elder Vince, he is not here for the money. We don't pay him. He's literally not here for the money. He is not here for the stage. If you know Elder Vince, the last thing, we had to force him to preach a sermon at our church because that was just not his natural go-to of wanting to do that. And it's not easy. He shares, this is a lot harder than I thought. Elder Vince is only here because he feels called by the Lord to be fully devoted to you. You guys don't know half the things Elder Vince does. He does so much. And if he wasn't driven by the Lord, I don't think he'd do this. The most awkward, I'm there too, and that's kind of awkward for me to praise myself. I'll let you guys decide what I am, but I could just share one thing about maybe the credential I bring here, which is I've probably been here longer than you guys. I've been here probably the longest at this church. And there's a lot of bad that comes with that. Man, some of you, you know me too well. Some of you knew me before I was a Christian. How embarrassing. You have stories of me in college. Some of you knew me as a single when I wasn't married and you were worried about me. Are you this guy gonna get married one? You guys had fears for me. Some of you saw me get married. Some of you saw me as an intern. Some of you guys were here, you heard my first sermon. How embarrassing. You saw me preach for the first time. You saw me in my worst. You saw me stumble in different roles in the church. There's a lot of cringiness because I'm at a church like that. And there's a lot of positives too, because that means you guys know me. You are witnesses to who I truly am. If I went to a different church right now, I could pretend this guru, hey guys, Tom's here. Just I came from I background. I'm just giving off this vibe of yeah, I know this, but I can't do that here. If I can be effective here, I have to be the real me, because you guys know the real me. So many of you. I could be like Paul, where I'm you know this about me. You know my flaws. You know my mistakes. And I'll tell anybody at this church who's visiting, if you want to know what type of pastor is leading this church, don't ask me. Ask the members here. They'll tell you a lot of embarrassing stuff about me, but I think they could also tell you the truth about what I'm about, what the elders are about. I'm actually really happy being at a church like that. I'm really happy that I don't have to hide. I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not. You could call like this is not true any moment. It's a very humbling thing that's there to be part of this. And it's also, I feel like this is the type of church I think Paul envisioned, where it's that type of relationship with the shepherds. And so if I could just charge us just one final thing. Some of you, as you're hearing all this, you've been hurt by church leaders. You're a youth pastor, the church that you're at, and you left that church and you acknowledged it, but the pain's still there, it's kind of buried, and you're just kind of carrying this bitterness that's there that makes you a little bit weary of leadership anywhere. Just know you're always going to be suspicious and passive unless you deal with that wound. And what you probably need is like deep healing, because it's rough. It's a painful thing when it happens. Some of you here, you weren't hurt by a leader, but you are leading somewhere in a different sphere, whether inside a church or outside a church. And the question is, how are you leading? Are you making Jesus and his church look beautiful? What are your motives, your methods, your mission? Members, if I could give you one last charge, is the only time you think about the leaders here is when a scandal happens. It's when something bad happens. That's the only time you go, how can I pray for you? Thank you to all the members who've been praying for the elders. Thank you for those random DMs that sent our way. Just know it means a lot for the few of you who have been doing that. Can you imagine if a church together, we are just praying and caring, because we know that the church can only be beautiful when not only the members, but those who are leading the church are also leading in a way that's God-honoring. Can I just charge the members, pray for our church as well? Let's all pray together.